The Spanish frontier reached Primaria Alta, or what is now southern Arizona. Three distinct lifestyles existed in the region. The Pima were essentially peaceful farmers who irrigated the rich valley soil, lived in settled communities, and nearly always produced a surplus of agricultural goods. The Papago, also peaceably inclined, inhabited the harsh desert area to the west and lived in somewhat less permanent villages than their linguistic relatives, the Pima, and practiced dry farming and food gathering in their vast domain. The nomadic Apaches were relative newcomers to the area. They lived in easily constructed shelters and wrested a living from the land by food gathering, hunting, and raiding their more sedentary agricultural neighbors. The earliest Spanish explorers, such as Fray Marcos de Niza, Cabeza de Vaca, Coronado, had little impact on the natives, except for the introduction of the horse. Direct and far-reaching changes began in 1691, when Father Eusebio Francisco Kino arrived at the Pima village of Tumacacari to establish a mission. As an institution of the Spanish conquest, the mission not only brought Indians into the church, but also introduced them to European crops, livestock, and technology. Officials in Madrid expected to transform the Indians into Spanish-speaking subjects of the king within 20 years. Carlos III, King of Spain, pressed an official policy towards the natives that was well-intended and for that time perhaps relatively enlightened. But the average Spaniard ignored it more often than not, and after more than 60 years of the stresses brought on by the cultural change of seeing their best land appropriated and of suffering the rash behavior of many Spaniards, the Pima revolted in 1751. It was evident that the Spaniards could not hold their northwest frontier with the forces then available, so a Presidio, or fort, was constructed at Tubac in 1752. The 50 soldiers who garrisoned the new post were expected to bring their families and settle in the area, establishing Tubac as the oldest European town in Arizona. Although the Pima never again revolted, the soldiers were kept busy by the Apaches, who had discovered that running off Spanish livestock was a lot more rewarding than raiding Pima villages. With a population of around 400, the Presidio became for 2 decades the social and cultural center of the region. But a distant threat to Spain's New World Empire brought yet another change. The Russians had established Fort Ross, only 70 miles north of the Bay Area in California. In order to forestall their further advance down the west coast, the commander of Tubac Presidio was commissioned to find an overland route to the coast. In 1774, Juan Bautista de Anza and 20 Tubac troopers became the first persons of European descent to journey overland to the Pacific coast. And in 1775, de Anza again made the journey, this time with 240 colonists who founded the city of San Francisco. Believing that the remaining Tubac civilians could now fend for themselves, the colonial government moved the garrison north to Tucson, but Apache raids increased until Tubac was abandoned. In 1786, the Presidio was re-garrisoned, this time, ironically, with Pima soldiers under Spanish officers. Another period of prosperity followed, and the Apaches were kept relatively quiet with a liquor subsidy and other supplies. Mexico won her independence from Spain in 1821. This had little immediate effect on Tubac, but the new government faced many problems and was unable to maintain an effective Indian policy on its distant frontier. The Apaches again took to raiding. Gradually, but with ever-increasing pressure from the Apaches, Tubac began to decline. and the discovery of gold in California drew away enough population that they were able to overrun the town. Survivors fled to Tucson and Magdalena. American 49ers passing through described Tubac as having been recently deserted. At this time, however, it was apparent to the U.S. government that one of the best transcontinental railroad routes lay through the Mexican town of Tucson. In 1854, the Gadsden Purchase was consummated, giving the U.S. a railroad route through most of what is now Arizona, south of the Gila River. Yankee enterprise entered the area in the form of the Sonora Mining and Exploring Company, with Charles Poston as superintendent, and with headquarters at the old Presidio at Tubac. A boom followed, which increased the town's population to around 1,000 inhabitants. There were 2 hotels, a store, and in 1859, Arizona's first newspaper. The Civil War rudely ended this short-lived era of prosperity when federal troops were withdrawn, leaving Tubac once again to the Apaches. Following the war, the town was slowly resettled, and in 1885, enough people lived in the area to require a one-room adobe school. But Tubac remained essentially a small agrarian community with a strong Mexican personality until well into the 20th century. Following World War II, artists and craftsmen saw the crumbling adobe ruins and the magnificent scenery and began to settle the town. In 1958, the old Presidio site was given to the state as the nucleus of Arizona's first state park. Today, the Presidio remains recall more than 100 years of Spanish rule in the Santa Cruz Valley, and they also recall a time when a traveler just hadn't seen modern Arizona unless he had been to Tubac.